for posterity. It's always a little ominous when that little voice comes in and says, it's like, oh, we are listening. So yeah, I think, so what we're going to do here is I've got a little bit of an introduction. We've got a handful of slides to lead you through. We're not going to kill you with PowerPoint. There's a larger deck that Bill will explain as background, but we've distilled it down to a half a dozen or so. And where we really want to go is get you inputs onto a handful of things, and I'll get there in a moment. Just to make sure we kind of ground this in some context, and that will be my piece. I think you all know we're the Economic Development Collaborative, but in my role, our role, we are the fiscal agent or convening partner for the Broadband Consortium of the Pacific Coast, BCPC, or is it PCBC? I don't know. We are one of about 15 or so consortia from around the state, regional, as designated by the California Public Utilities Commission, more or less funded by dollars out of the California Advanced Services Fund. It's a little thing that you'll see on your phone bill. It's a couple of pennies. It's a little pain. We pull from you every month to sustain these efforts. Our goal, broadly speaking, and we'll get back to this as well, is to facilitate regional strategy investment in broadband deployment. That is more fiber and broadband adoption. And we've more leaned on the deployment, but we're leaning more increasingly toward the adoption. So both are critical. And again, like I said, we'll get more into those as well. Our interest in this, though, really started about 8 years ago. And as an economic development group, while we're passionately into broadband, we try to organize ourselves conceptually sort of as a triple bottom line, at least striving to be a triple bottom line organization. And the reason I bring that up in this context is we are interested in broadband for just economic competitiveness. Businesses need to connect. We recognize that access to high-speed internet connections, especially in the COVID era, is essential for broadly shared equity and inclusion. And there's a huge environmental values to these as well, which we'll get to in a second, which is more or less a huge piece of this item. But we've looked at, how does broadband improve e-government, public engagement, how it engages telehealth, how it engages telework, of course. In our region, precision ag, smart cities, smart buildings, electric vehicles, e-learning, e-commerce, you name it. All of this stuff is increasingly important, especially in the COVID world. One thing I wanted to mention, though, just from our background, and I don't want to go too long here, but 2 points from our background. When we first got involved as a broadband consortium, we did, with another partner, some analysis of what really was the sort of grade. If you were to rank us as if we were in school on an A through F ranking and go really down city by city, even zip code by zip code. And we discovered that the tri-counties we represent as our consortium, San Luis, Santa Barbara, Ventura. This project today we're talking about is purely Ventura. At best, we were a C minus, a couple of areas C or B minus, and a lot of Ds and even some Fs. And while this curve, normally grading looks sort of like a bell curve with a fair number of A's and a few failures, this bell curve for the region and for California, and frankly for the nation, is skewed on the lower end. There ain't many A's out there. So this is a motivator in any number of ways. The other issue for Ventura County, and I see Amanda on here, and she would have this data far better than I do, but what we know in Ventura County is that we are not a hub and spoke sort of city with a single urban concentration. What we've got are 10 different cities, all with their sort of job centers, and maybe 9 of them if you combine Wainimi and Oxnard to some degree. And then what that results in is sort of this really wild, complicated set of something like only about 20% of our population works in the city they live in. So we got people moving all over. We got people moving into LA. We got people commuting back and forth to Santa Barbara. And transportation is a huge issue for us. Why do I bring this up finally to this project? We had this opportunity last year to get involved with Southern California Association of Governments. You may recall that's everything from Imperial County to Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange, Los Angeles and us, to look at the fundamental question that we know at our gut is true, but we don't know exactly what the data tells us. And what our gut tells us and what the data initially tells us is that if you reduce vehicle miles traveled, you should have an attendant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So, but let's figure out whether or not we can really validate that, find reliable data. Our role in this, in a collaboration with groups from Imperial County up through Ventura, is to do survey work with folks like you to augment more of the hardcore scientific data and counting cars and getting exact detail about what are commute patterns and so on. But we're also looking to kind of ground truth this with inputs from 3 different kind of concentrations, from business leaders, from government entities, and from nonprofits in the sort of healthcare sector bundled together. At least that's the methodology that we're working on. And so we've done some survey. You guys all participated in that, and Bill will share inputs that we got back. It ain't perfect science, but it really is important work to get our voices in and make sure that we're helping influence how Southern Cal Association of Governments and critically Caltrans thinks about this stuff. We have the wrong passcode there. So finally, got some voices there. We're going to try and land on some consensus on what we think are some of the policy priorities for this. And again, they're not rocket science. They're going to come back to issues about either we're going to do more and better to deploy more middle and last mile fiber, or we're going to do more to connect students, or we're going to connect users, end users, and consumers of services. We're going to do more to provide capacity for the providers of service to do that on online platforms. In our world, for example, as an EDC in a small business center, we're working with literally hundreds of local businesses on how they figure out to adapt to e-commerce platforms and digital marketing strategies. So this stuff is all over. We're going to do this in less than an hour and a half, and we'll get there if I shut up. But before I turn it over to Bill, we're going to run around the room and introduce ourselves, because we don't have a ton of time. Who you are, where you work, or who you work for, and just a word or two maybe about your take on the whole world of broadband deployment adoption. We're going to do this quickly. I'm going to call on people because I think I can see you all on one screen. We'll do Bill last because he's coming up next. And we'll do Sasha next to last. He's part of our staff team here, as was Maria. So we'll start with you, James. You're at the top of my screen.
I think I'm the only James. Okay, James Workley. I'm with the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments. We're both a metropolitan planning organization and regional transportation planning agency. So broadband is kind of high on our radar right now. We'd certainly like to do more as well. We're a sister agency to BCPC, which is probably on this call as well.
Very cool. Thank you. Noel.
I need to unmute. Hi, Noel Heredia. I represent Digital Value Creation. We provide interim chief technology officer services to nonprofits and to startups. And our focus is our involvement with BCPC. I've been working with Bill for nearly 2 years now and helping develop the go-to launch process and getting this message out and the strategy for adoption of the necessary technologies and processes.
Very cool. Thanks. Amanda.
Hi, good morning. I'm Amanda Fagan. I'm the Director of Planning and Sustainability for the Ventura County Transportation Commission. We serve as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency for Ventura County. And relevant to this discussion, we also administer the Ventura County Transportation Model, our countywide traffic model.
Cool, thanks. And I think it was 2019, was it, Bill? We had your former boss, Darren Kettle, as keynote sort of dialogue for us as a broadband forum. So we were looking at the transportation angles on this. It's a huge Ventura County issue. So thanks for being here. Tim Williams.
Good morning. Thanks, Bruce. Tim Williams, founder, CEO of Digital West, but now we are Astound Broadband. We're a national player. We're the 6th largest carrier in the country, and we are very aggressively going after the Central Coast.
So when you're astounded, you put an exclamation point at the end of that name, or you just, it's all by itself?
I think it's just astound, yes.
I like
But you
that.
can if you want.
Perfect. Jeffrey.
Hi, everybody. Jeff Lambert, Ventura County Community Foundation. Love the concept of focusing on adoption, and clearly equitable distribution is an important factor for us in Ventura County.
Outstanding. Sandy.
Yeah, Sandy Smith, I'm a land use consultant for CESP Consulting, and maybe Bruce could share which hat I'm wearing in this conversation. No, don't go there, Bruce. But I'm on the Workforce Development Board and chair of the Ventura Chamber of Commerce, and I'm looking at this, as Jeff noted, from the angle of equitable distribution, and particularly from the Workforce Development Board and inclusionary sort of practices, so we can have better outreach to our workforce.
Excellent. Brian.
Yeah, Brian Chong, City of Moore Park. We're one of the more aggressive cities in the broadband space. I'm actually glad I could follow Sandy, because I think there is still infrastructure work to be done, but I think we're very close to the point here, at least in Moore Park, where adoption is going to be the key issue over physical infrastructure.
Very cool. Nancy Schramm.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Nancy Schramm. I'm the library director for the Ventura County Library System. And our libraries have a long history of providing equitable access to internet and broadband and computers especially for our underserved communities. So really, we're looking at our public libraries through that lens of equity, and also really very interested in looking at how our libraries could serve as those anchor institutions in providing broadband access and broadband strategies. And I have to note that I have to leave in about 10 minutes. My apologies. I wish I could stay for the whole meeting, but I'll be curious to hear after the meeting what was discussed. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. Thanks. Linda Swan.
Hi, Linda Swan, City of Simi Valley. Much in favor of adoption of broadband. I feel that it brings the community together and really supports economic development and outreach.
Thank you. Dan.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to meet so many of you for the first time. I'm Dan Watkins. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor of Technology for Ventura County Community College District. And obviously, we're very focused in wanting to create equity in education for our students throughout the Central Coast. So glad to be here.
Thank you. Rosie, who is our poster child for getting improved broadband to her home so she has better connectivity. Rosie.
Good morning. Thank you, Bruce. Clearly, that's my number one priority, but no, I'm Economic Development Manager for the City of Oxnard, and definitely, it's a priority to us for all of the reasons that Bruce mentioned: environmental, social equity, and of course, economic development for our business community. So excited to be moving this forward and look forward to learning more today.
Thank you. Don?
Hi, Don Gerkensmeyer, Ventura County Office of Education Network Manager. We've got about 20 districts on 10 gig fiber, and we've got the smaller schools out in Santa Paula on 1 gig fiber through Frontier and Spectrum. We've had point-to-point wireless to all these schools before, and it's good to have all of them on fiber now, but there's still the equity issues in the Santa Paula area to get to the underserved communities.
Thank you. Michael, you moved around on me 2 days in a row now.
Hi, Bruce. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I am Michael Soltis. I'm a professor and chair of computer science at California State University, Channel Islands. And I am also a principal scientist at a local company, a defense contractor in Camarillo, GBL Systems. I would say that broadband is absolutely key, both for the small, medium-sized business I'm working for in the university. Our students had to drive to campus and park somewhere close to a hotspot in order to be able to do attend their classes and do their labs during the pandemic. Same goes for the company. Almost everybody worked remotely for the last 2 years. And the fact that we did not let anybody go, but we hired, was enabled by broadband. So I'm a big supporter and believer in this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Calvin, excuse me, I mean Stephen Meyer.
Stephen Meyer, I work for Ventura County Office of Education as the Director of Infrastructure. Work very closely with Don, and we are a K-12 HSN node site / scenic node site. So if there is an opportunity to partner with any of you wonderful people here, we are definitely open to the opportunity. Plus it gets the more bandwidth that we use, the bigger the pipe we get from scenic. So go 100 gig.
Excellent. Scenic's been a great partner. Dana.
Yeah. Good morning, Bruce. I'm Dana Stroud. I'm with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. I'm based in Paso Robles, but I have the Central Coast as a region, which includes parts of Ventura through Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Monterey, San Benito counties. We're I guess you could consider us a resource as you move forward, and an interested party in implementation, realizing that broadband is the crux of our economic growth and sustainability in California, and want to connect with resources as much as possible to help with the work you guys are all doing. Thank you.
Thanks. Nikki.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nikki Mays, and I am a management fellow in the city of Santa Paula in the city manager's office. And I help with a wide range of issues and projects, but broadband is one of my main focus areas. So it's nice to see you all.
Thank you. George. There he is.
Hello, good morning, everyone. George Amendola, resident of Ventura, and I've been in the telecommunications business for most of my career, notably serving as vice president of broadband in the 90s for a Santa Barbara-based company, Star Telecommunications. And we had a global network throughout Asia Pacific, the United States, and Europe. My interest locally here in Ventura is to see the last mile, middle mile connection come together. I think it will have a great impact on our business community and create a lot of social equity within also our underprivileged communities. Thank you. Good morning.
Thanks. And Stephen.
Bruce, can you hear me?
There you are. Yes.
Yeah. Stephen Sawyer, Director of Government Affairs for Charter Communications, also known as Spectrum. We serve pretty much the entire county of Ventura, all the cities within Ventura, and our services have fiber going to all the cities, and we have residential service capable of providing 1 gig service throughout the entire footprint.
Thank you. Andy?
Good morning, everybody. Andy Sobel, City of Santa Paula Council member, and also sit on the EDC and the Broadband Consortium and VCTC. So get a lot of broadband, which is great that everybody's talking about it, which wasn't really happening 2 years ago. And yeah, ditto on what everybody's saying. I was impressed. I think somebody name dropped 100 gig. I'm not sure I've heard that yet. And I just, as of a few days ago, supposedly have 1 gig available to me at my home here in Santa Paula via Frontier, which is kind of a surprise. So they've been driving all over town, dragging fiber all over. So we're definitely in the part of the exponential curve, I feel.
Excellent news. Thanks for being here, Andy. And Daniel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Adello. I'm a transportation planner with the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments. Obviously, we're based in the San Luis Obispo County region, and we're looking to increase access and speed to the internet, given the highlight of the digital divide from the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ned, I think you just popped in. We're doing quick introductions. If he catches up, we'll come back to Ned. Maria, you want to hop in?
Sure. Maria Kelly, I live in San Luis Obispo County, and I'm working with the consortium in the strategy in Santa Barbara County and doing outreach in San Luis Obispo County and part of the EDC BCPC team.
Thank you. Sasha.
Hey everyone, I'm Sasha Burrows. I'm a communications associate alongside Maria and Bill for the BCPC. And I think broadband is the fourth utility in a right. So I'm excited to do all I can in my part to help the future of broadband.
Thank you. Ned, are you there? You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm back in now. Ned Branch, I'm the director of the Blanchard Community Library in Santa Paula, longtime broadband advocate. I think we were probably the first folks in Santa Paula to actually have a fiber connection. I'm also part of the ad hoc broadband committee in Santa Paula, the same group that Nikki and Andy, who are on the online today, are part of.
Thanks for being here. Bill, the show is yours. I think I captured anyone. Let me ask though, did I miss anyone? Names move around every now and then. Looks good. All right, Bill.
I think we're in good shape. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for filling out the surveys and your interest in all of this. Andy talked about exponential. Yeah, I think that as a minimum, we're going through a transformative time. It's unbelievable. And I think that some of the feedback of the surveys will bear that out. I attended a meeting much similar to this in LA. And one slide deck that you've received in your email has 25 different slides. And in terms of going through all 25 and talking about all 25, it's a bit much. And so if there is, I invite you to look at it. If there's anything of interest in any of those 25 slides, we can talk about it. Especially offline if you'd like, but that is the cold, hard, real data from the survey that occurred. What I prefer to do, and I talked back and forth with Bruce about this over the last few days, is keep this pretty much high level. And rather than, as the slide deck was called, dense by some in previous meetings, try to avoid the dense stuff and talk more about the substantive, what can we do stuff. And also want to reiterate what Bruce said, and that is that this is anecdotal. This is not meant to be a sample of a population. There are no statistics tied to this in terms of levels of confidence, those kinds of things. It really is trying to capture the moment, capture the spirit of civic leadership. You know, where do people think we're going or need to go, and just start sticking our finger up in the air and get a sense of where people are coming from. And that's why your feedback is so important. And I think you'll be quite impressed with the information as well. I remember back in 2019 sitting down with Darren Kettle, and he was talking about the 101 widening was in process somewhere, and it's probably still in plans in terms of here in Ventura County. He said, if we could just do carpooling one day a week, where you work at home, not carpooling, but actually work at home one day a week, you take off 20% of the cars on the freeway. And it's, you think about that, and it was astonishing. Yes, everybody, if we just worked at home one day a week, 20%, it would make a big difference. Well, I think that what the data shows is, didn't know it would happen this way, but it seems to be happening, something similar to that in those kinds of numbers in a big way, and we can talk about that. So I'm going to share my screen. I've got about 6 or 7 slides. We'll take about 10 minutes. Then open it up and let you folks give reaction to any of the 25 slides, any of the discussion that we're talking about. And we'll ask a number of key questions. Don't have to go for a full 90 minutes on this, but we do want to start the conversation and go for as long as we've got the energy to go and really process this and talk about next steps. So let me share the screen. Everybody see that? Okay. I want to make sure I see everybody too. So I'm going to do that. Now I've got everybody. Okay, findings, strategies, and then questions and feedback. I think Bruce shared with you the fact that this is a number of partners. BCPC is, we've got the Central Coast. LA Deal is a new consortium out of the LA EDC. SBBC is the Southern Border Broadband Consortium, and that's the Imperial Valley. And SCAG and CETF are also in this. The Inland Empire is Riverside and San Bernardino counties. And so we capture the whole SCAG region with this study in terms of the data. We honed in, I think Bruce mentioned this, on 3 different groups. One group was the public municipal side of things. Another group was the private sector. And another group was a combination of education and health. And so these were the types of organizations. Believe it or not, we tried to get 45. That was the number that we were asked to get. And we got quite a bit more than 45 data points and samples and feedback. And so we were quite pleased with the level of participation in the survey. And it also shows you the number of employees by percentage. So this data, don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it when it kind of sets the context for the 25 slides that you have in your inbox, but that gives you a feel for the scope of who we've talked with. I want to emphasize once again, anecdotal civic leadership inputs, talking about directions, policies that need to be discussed, and directions we need to go next. It's designed to inform. As I was having that beginning of COVID, there was a buzzword everybody was talking about, and that was, what's the new normal? If you probably recall hearing it, well, we're going to go through this and there's going to be a new normal. The interesting thing about this particular slide is, I think we're getting a feel for a new normal. Where the lines start flattening, it's where people start settling, people and organizations and behaviors and patterns. And so you can see where we were. What's on the horizontal axis of this slide is before the pandemic, during the pandemic, where we're at currently, and what the expectations are for the future. And so what you see as we get from where we are currently into the expectations of where we are, I think we're getting a sense for what we could call a new normal. And that really does talk about, telework. The fact was, the blue lines come down, and there was a lot of people working, full-time in their office. But now, in terms of what's happening, in terms of impressions and opinions and perceptions and where it's going, we see that blue line not returning to the levels it was before, but at a lower level. And that encourages me to believe that this is going to be here to stay. It will be part of a new normal. Before COVID, had we ever heard of the idea of hybrid? I mean, it's become quite popular, and so the hybrid work environment versus all remote environments, I think it's taking hold. And so that's part of one of the major takeaways here that I think is important to think about. Next slide. Big numbers. When you think about the fact that how many folks are working, are not engaged at some part of the time at home, we're down to 20% roughly, just over 20%. And once again, this is not meant to be the entire population. This is the people that we surveyed. When you get into essential workers and you look at the general population, a whole these numbers I'm sure would be skewed. But from the perception of the civic leaders and the folks that we talked with, a major portion of the survey recipients, 80%, work from home in some part. And so that's a significant shift. And it's quite a bit different than what you find in the SCAG region overall. And so that's something to consider. In terms of policies now, this is where really gets interesting. I'm going to start at the high level, and we see an awful lot of similarities between SCAG as a region and where we are as a county. Hybrid and flexible work arrangements is preferred. And when you say hybrid and flexible, it's not that Mondays and Fridays, it's allowing everybody the discretion rather than committing to a specific number of days a week. The private sector is very much infrastructure oriented. We want to have more connectivity to our employees where they live. We need to talk about middle mile, other offices, other parts of the community. It's infrastructure focused. You get into public agencies, municipalities, service providers, education, and healthcare, and it's very similar to what our self-introductions talked about. You could see the shift. It's not, yes, infrastructure is important, but let's talk about that digital equity piece. Let's talk about, you know, inclusion piece and the internet for all and the adoption aspect. And so I think it's an understandable shift. It's an important shift, and we've got to do both. You know, there really is. And so as a consortia, it's really interesting because it is a chicken and egg. It's like taste, the old beer commercial, tastes great, less filling. I mean, we have to do deployment, we have to do adoption. They go hand in hand. And so those are going to be very important strategies to develop as we move forward. I also want to say, as I started this presentation, part of the transformation that's going to be involved and why this is so important at this point in time to have this discussion is because of the dump trucks full of cash, the money, the funding, everything that's happening, the billions, if you will, that's going to be funding this transformational change in infrastructure. We're spending an awful lot of time every day, you know, talking to the folks in the federal government in Sacramento. You know, what are the programs? What are the projects? How's it going to flow? It's so important that we have our handle of our communities of need, our connections that have to be required back, both in the middle mile between communities as well as in the last mile in every neighborhood. And so having this conversation and having a plan come together that embraces everything we're talking about, this is the time. We've got to do this. So you break it down to the next level, and this is us. You know, and once again, if you look at the level of high scores and the percentages of respondents that contribute to the high scores, the same three indicators follow through at the SCAG level to the local level. Private sector was focused on infrastructure throughout the region. Public agencies, not-for-profits, and education really focused on the adoption piece, making sure that the service was affordable and there was a computing device available. Also, the literacy piece is going to be very important as well. So, Bruce, you may want to talk a little bit about the history of the analysis from CLU. This is a fascinating study. It has both numbers and percentages. But you know, we've done this now. We started here in Ventura County in February, and you might want, Bruce, you want to just give a little bit of context to where this is separate apart from the survey.
So there were two sort of antecedents to this. One, I think most of you, probably all of you know, or maybe not all of you up further north, at Cal Lutheran University, we have a fascinating professor, Dr. Jamshid Demoohi, who has an Institute for Social and Economic Research. And we had Dr. Demoohi first for us focus on understanding sort of what was the profile or of folks most impacted by COVID. And as we know, COVID had a disproportionate impact on low-income minority workers, women, and workers concentrated in the small retail, service sector, leisure and hospitality, broadly speaking, you know, arts and entertainment, food and accommodation, et cetera. And then we had them expand the look at another question, which is, what are we really seeing in terms of the digital divide in Ventura County? What are we seeing as digital equity or lack thereof? And he took a couple of different swipes at it. And the one we're showing here, I'll get to in a second. The first look he did was to take national information as to how much does a household spend on different aspects of its budget. How much is spent on housing, is spent on transportation, is spent on utilities, and actually broke it right down into how much is spent on phone and or internet connection. And then paired that with data on poverty or incomes and looked at it by zip code. And of course, we're seeing that it's a real challenge for low-income families distributed throughout the zip codes of Ventura County. On top of that, though, he used US Census data for these particular displays here. On the left-hand side, all the zip codes in Ventura County, households literally, according to the census data, and this might be a little high because depending on who's answering the data in the census, households with no computer or internet connection in 2019. The table on the right displays the same data, but simply as a percentage of households, not the raw number. The percent, either take is astounding. You're seeing in average, not all zip codes are the same relative to the density and total population, but you're seeing a whole lot of those zip codes there, and you'll recognize them by region: South Oxnard, Santa Clara River Valley, west side of Ventura. 93001, for example, is downtown and the west side of Ventura. 060, Santa Clara Valley, et cetera. We're seeing some incredibly high numbers here of families with, so this is simply one display. We're having the same research, and there's actually about a dozen tables for each zip code throughout the entire SCAG region that Dr. Demouy has put together, and we just drew this one out alone. But it really does give, in this case, just one swipe at this question of the digital divide in Ventura County. Now, this is looking specifically at connectivity, at the hardware side of it, right? And so as we all know, in the world of adoption and or deployment for that matter, there are several pieces, right? Is there a pipeline? Is there infrastructure to the house? Does the household purchase the equipment that connects? And if they do they know how to use it? And are they using it in a broad way for all those different activities in education, to telehealth, to work, et cetera? This one's simply looking at this fundamental question that we thought was absolutely astounding. We think Ventura County is way further ahead in terms of our distribution of wealth and opportunity, but this is an enormous number of disconnected people. I'll leave it there, Bill.
So we've had a number of conversations in, for example, Santa Paula, Ned, Nikki, Andy. I mean, we've, the number 93060, the numbers look like 23% in terms of not having last mile not having that connection or computer necessarily in the community. You may have soon the fiber to the premises. At the same time, we now are staring face to face with people and adoption issues. So we've got to really shift and figure out, with equity partners and all the strategies we can come up with, how best to get that internet for all.
Just to hop in there, we wholly embrace, and others can dive in on this, people have cell phones, and we recognize that as well, and that data may not be picked up, of course, in this particular question. So people may not be entirely disconnected, but in terms of a stable home-based connection that is sufficient to do things like homework, education, and work is a whole nother matter. Sorry.
Yeah. So as a consortia, we really are focused on getting the connections, number one, but then understanding the complexity of the issues. And this data is the first data that I've seen that really put some numbers in areas that we can look at and get started. Eventually, when you talk about the transformation involved, if you're going to want to, with your partners, work door to door. And so models very similar to a complete count or a vaccine, push or whatever that we've done regionally in terms of going door to door and getting involvement in communities of inclusion. We're going to have to do that with broadband as well. So this kind of describes the significance of the problem. So with that as the backdrop, I want to move to the next set of questions and kick it back to you for your reaction, your thoughts. We can start with just observations and conclusions about what you've seen. As I said, feel free to go through the slide deck and anything else that leaps out at you, we can talk about that as well. The three things as a consortium we're looking for feedback on are the middle mile discussions. Those are the connections regionally and within our communities to one another. The last mile discussions, and that is those communities that have no broadband, door to door, and what we can be doing to encourage multiple providers to come in and create a healthy competitive environment. And then the inclusion conversation of actually working with the communities, the organizations in the community that serve those communities, the trusted agents and bridge builders, if you will. And I think we've set the table with these slides to talk about the scope and scale of the problem, and would invite your feedback in terms of what you've seen and ideas about where to go next. Brian, you're always a good guy to kick off conversations. I'm going to put you on the spot. Anything new here?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that wasn't mentioned when you compare the data for Ventura County versus the SCAG region as a whole, there's certainly work to be done, but we do seem to have less of a problem than the SCAG region as a whole. So there are fewer employers, fewer policymakers saying that, no, we don't have the infrastructure. Yes, this is causing me a problem. So I don't want to lose sight of that. We did well, relatively speaking. I think on the funding side of things, there's billions and billions coming down, and at least from our standpoint in Moorpark, most of it is not available to us and is going towards other things that are needed and helpful. I think one of the things, regardless of whether we're focusing on infrastructure, digital literacy, adoption, whatever it is, building trust, there does need to be more of an ongoing funding source for broadband initiatives than CASIV. And I think, I don't know if Jeff Lambert is still on the call, but in terms of big picture policies, I know he has probably the strongest planning background, but to the extent that we can use vehicle mile trip reduction and telecommuting as environmental mitigation for development. So to offset their carbon emissions, let's say, as a result of building this business park or this tract of homes, while you're putting in this infrastructure, and maybe you're paying an in lieu fee to the local agency to fund these programs to actually reduce those vehicle mile trips. I think that's something that would do well regionally, nationally, but someone has to create that framework to charge those fees. I'll leave it there just to start the discussion.
Any others? Thank you, Brian. Amanda.
Oh, I hate to sort of rain on this parade, but from a transportation perspective, I don't know where Darren got the 20% figure, but when we look at VMT reduction potential related to telework, we're seeing from the research numbers closer to 0.8% reduction in annual VMT, at least, from the data. And we also did some modeling work to look at if everyone who sort of traditionally would make sense to work from home, worked from home 100% of the time, we would see a 2% reduction in annual vehicle delay, or vehicle hours of delay, rather, the VHD, which isn't a perfect comparison to vehicle miles traveled, but that was a 2% reduction. And we're still doing some additional modeling to get a better sense of that relationship between vehicle miles traveled reductions and telecommuting. But the data is complicated because just because people don't work from home doesn't mean they stay home. Right. And so there are other trips that get substituted for the commute trips. So I just wanted to kind of, again, I hate to rain on the parade, but from a transportation solutions perspective, we should not see it as the savior for our congestion problems.
I'll just top in real quick. Amanda, you're spot on that the numbers, the expectations were very inflated. As a complement to this particular angle that we're working on, UC Davis, I'll see if I can find that link. Faculty there are really trying to analyze that question and look at trajectories over time. How does behavior modify? Today, we're not seeing as much of a reduction because people are driving to the corner market twice a day and all of that. But will that moderate? Will that change as people get more adjusted to the notion that they're working at home? That's more psychological, and I know your modeling will have to capture all of that, but and of course it adjusts commute patterns. For us, it means fewer people maybe connecting on the 101 through Thousand Oaks into Agoura and so on, but maybe messing up the roads between, you know, the 23 between Thousand Oaks and Simi. We don't know all that yet, but I appreciate all the modeling you're doing. It's huge. Thanks.
Thanks. And I am curious too, I guess I don't know enough about the scope of your study and where you're going from here beyond this survey, because we do have a lot of other data resources in terms of commute patterns and you know, how many trips stay internal to the city versus how many leave each city, and a lot of that data we have just recently made available on our website and publicly available. Before, it used to be sort of embedded in the traffic model on our modeler's computer and nobody else ever saw it, but we've now made that all public facing and available, so you can get a really good sense of what parts of our community have low vehicle miles traveled, and you know, sort of looking more at a more refined level at what commute patterns are and whatnot. So I'll send all that information over to you.
Just one comment. While we refer to this repeatedly as a project in collaboration with SCAG, Southern Cal Association of Governments, it's actually funded by Caltrans. And Caltrans is actually the designer of the methodology or the approver of the methodology, et cetera. So yeah, we were invited to do this as a complement to the kinds of more granular and I should say more valid and reliable sorts of data that you're generating and other transportation and COGs are generating in their regions. So yeah, we can follow up more on that, but ultimately this report is commissioned by Caltrans to add to their modeling, I would say.
We had significant conversation at the front end of this where we knew what the patterns had been. There was no data to talk about the shift that has occurred. If we're not having as many people going, for example, to shopping centers, or how do we account for FedEx and Amazon Prime and all of the new delivery services that are out there in terms of vehicle trips? If everybody is working at home, you know, they're also taking the kids places and doing whatever they're going to be doing is maybe more localized. And do we have a feel for that? And so you're absolutely correct. This was talking about business telework, and there's such a wider scope of why people are on the road, and we haven't addressed that at all. Thank you. Andy, your turn.
Thank you. Yeah, this is kind of just a little dovetail off of something you said in your report and a new learning for me. So recently we were on Verizon Wireless with 4 gigs or something, and we go over every so often, have to pay extra, but it kind of constrained the way we access data through the cell phone thing. So then we switched over to Spectrum, and we've gone unlimited. So, and it changed kind of how I interact using my phone, which is interesting. But so in talking to a variety of people, just mentioning this because I was pretty excited about it, how it kind of changed me a little bit. I'm learning, and I knew this a little bit through working with the school during the pandemic with people at home and hotspots, but there are many more people who use that have unlimited plans and using their phones as hotspot for internet at home. And you mentioned that that's tough to capture, but it's just kind of a learning for me in the last few weeks that we really haven't talked about that vehicle as much as fiber. But I think, I'm guessing in town, there's quite a few people who actually have computers or tablets at home and are using their phones as hotspot. So we do need to kind of keep that in the data.
Absolutely. Good point. Noel.
So my point is around the definition of hybrid, what we define as hybrid and what we talk about working from home. I think there's a trend I hate using the word trend because it sounds something that is it comes and goes. But there's a move, if you will, towards a totally different approach, which Bruce used the term hub and spoke, where instead of having a single concentration of an office space where people can congregate to do what they're supposed to do, like, and the images coming back to the movies from the 1930s and 40s of people sitting in cubes and beavering away at calculators or whatever the heck they used. I'm talking about the hub and spoke approach where you have distributed offices. And this is so feasible. The thing that we have been missing out when we're talking about connectivity and getting the utility going, which is essential, is the emergence of a whole new raft of technologies which enable working at a remote place. They're using just not working from a bedroom or working from a home office, but a whole mini office, if you will. The sort of whiteboard technologies, the sort of tools that are used for collaboration are amazing. And that's putting a totally different spin on this concept of hybrid, where you're not working from home. It's not always practical, and not working from a central office, but working from a hybrid office. It opens opportunities for cities to promote the concept of localized office centers. And the traffic patterns can be very different now. Achieve the sort of goals we want in multiple fronts. And it can be a huge economic engine as well. I've got a presentation on that, which I'm happy to share with anybody who's interested. But this is something which is opening a totally new vista of opportunity for us as we advocate.
Bruce, I wondered if you'd comment on that. We have astonishing amount of
A couple of
commuting between
different
cities.
transportation pieces of data, and clearly Amanda's more the master of this, but the general stuff that we see in a data source generated by US Department of Labor is that for Ventura County, ballpark, on average, it's about, or in total, in aggregate, it's about 20% of the population in Ventura County works and lives in the same city. In some cities, Fillmore, Santa Paula, it's low as 10 or 11%. In some of the larger cities, Thousand Oaks, Camarillo especially, higher, but never more than in the low 30s, frankly. So you're not going to fix that by any land use strategy in the near future. And it's sort of a byproduct of both history and current land use policy. The source strategy that we embrace, and frankly, I approve, is let's maintain tight urban boundaries. Let's maintain green belts between and around our cities. And one of the unintended consequences of that, of course, is you've got all sorts of travel between and among those cities. The bigger concern for us as a region is that we are also a pretty significant labor exporter. That is, we have fewer jobs per persons in the labor force as a ratio than just about any other Southern California communities, with the exception maybe of San Bernardino and Riverside, which tend to be very different, lower cost regions, allowing people to live there, buy homes, but then commute into the job centers in Los Angeles and Orange County. We've just not retained or grown the job base. Now, we'll use Darren's name one last time, and then we'll leave him alone, and we'll start talking about other leaders in transportation. When we had this chat before, Darren would always say, but you need to understand what that means is people are buying into the value proposition that is Ventura County, a great place to live, relatively affordable for the quality of life compared to Los Angeles, and willing to drive in and commute there. I don't disagree with that, but it does not otherwise diminish the point that we need an increased level of job creation to retain the talent that we have. That's not just for a transportation or quality of life question, but it's also a fundamental economic issue. That's a long expansion on the question as to how we distribute jobs between and among the cities. But the first question for us is more jobs, retain the talent. We often used to joke though, right? Why don't we just one day stop everybody, at the county line on the 110 or on the 101 and the 118, and have everybody exchange information about their jobs and then trade, and then we'll stay in LA and we'll stay in Ventura and we'll do that on the other border. it'd be an interesting experiment. Not exactly real or practical, but what the heck.
To Noel's point, from 86 to 06, about 20 years, I was one of those folks in Santa Paula that would get on the 126 and drive all the way into the Navy base. And I wasn't alone. The guy across the street, he worked at the Navy base. A handful of others in the neighborhood also worked at the Navy base. And we all made the trek back and forth from Santa Paula to Port Hueneme and Oxnard. And that was just what we did. And so the question I have is, are we reaching a point where a community like Santa Paula could figure out a way to work with employers throughout the region and create a hub that you can back and keep us, the hour that I would save in going back and forth from Santa Paula to Port Hueneme would be really welcomed. And whether they work at Amgen or the County of Ventura or any other large significant employer, if we could create a community-based mechanism where they could shop local, they could be close to the kids and go home for lunch, whatever. In the LA session we had earlier this week, people said, some people don't want to work at home because of the distractions, but they also don't want to necessarily make the commute. And so I think these are strategies that are worth exploring. Additional surveys can be done, conversations with potential partners. If you found 2 or 3 or 4 large firms that have a concentration of employees in a particular community, we might be able to make it work for those particular employers, as well as make it work for the people in that community. And they would welcome the opportunity to stay home as well as go to work. Just planting seeds here, folks.
I worry that the audience that would be receptive to that message would go all in on that approach, because fundamentally a big reason of the suburb to suburb commute pattern is the cost of housing. So most people don't have the ability to just move even within Ventura County easily because of the housing costs, the tax implications. So if employers, I'll just use Amgen as an example, who wants to be here, who has a history here, when they're doing these remote sites or off their original Thousand Oaks campus, right? They're not interested in Santa Paula. They're interested in Denver. They're interested in out-of-state areas. And I don't know that a lot of employers would be, willing to invest somewhat locally with that logic.
Brian, may I add to that? It's an interesting thing. I've worked with a home improvement company based out of North Carolina, and they couldn't attract the sort of talent they needed to support their technology operations. So guess what they did? They set up a satellite office somewhere in Austin. The point I'm making is that I understand and agree with what you're saying, but the converse is also true. There is, if we can advocate for the talent and the capability that is available in Ventura County, then creating the local delivery center in places like Ventura County can be attractive to people outside the county as well. So both, I agree with you, but there's an alternative to it as well. It's an attractive value proposition.
And I hope your version is stronger. I really do.
And I think also to Brian's point, do we have the talent pool in Ventura County to do remote work? I was on a call with the TSC the other day, and we had people that they couldn't attract local talent for some of the jobs that they had, so they had to go outside of the area. So and again, anecdotal, but it's something to think about.
That's where our universities and our colleges and system is going to play a role in workforce development and so on, building that talent. So that's what I see as an opportunity. I understand what you're saying.
Anecdotally, I think we are generating the talent, but that talent cannot afford housing here. And then they're the ones going to Austin, and that's where they're meeting the North Carolina tech companies, right? And like, I don't know, maybe I'm too housing focused, but
no, you're right. The exit data, population shift data shows that it's primarily early career folks in family formation and looking to purchase homes. The data that others have generated or claim that businesses and talent is leaving the region or California in droves just actually isn't quite there. Businesses continue to move to California. The upper career level folks are staying and moving to California, but we are hugely at risk of losing our young career professionals. Absolutely.
If I can just chime in for a moment. I don't know if everybody can hear me or not.
Yeah.
Great. My observation when I moved here 28 years ago, the 101 was a 2-lane road going north and south with very little traffic. And with the freeway expansion, there was a lag utilization. Now, we've seen that change in the past 10, 12 years, 15 years, et cetera. Just commuting down south last week to LAX, there was relatively no traffic on the road, again, related to some of the work from home with the recent COVID stay-at-home orders. Driving up to Santa Barbara, same. And I recall, years back when we had the Thomas Fire, the 2017 Thomas Fire, and I wish Jeff Lambert was still on the call because he did a lot of work locally in Ventura with the businesses in Santa Barbara and Santa Barbara County that had workforce who would commute up to Santa Barbara, and they couldn't make the trek because the 101 was shut down. And for the first time, I noticed, I live on the hillside downtown Ventura, beautiful view overlooking the ocean. And for the first time after the fires and after all the smoke cleared, I could start to see about a year later, Catalina Island. And after living here for 20 something years, I was, very unusual to see Catalina Island. And then also after, the first shutdown in 2020, I also noticed more and more visibility of Catalina Island, et cetera, whereas it was typically unusual to see. And then almost every day in the past 3 months, I could see it again, almost on a daily basis, except when we had cloud cover and rain. So I've anecdotally have noticed a shift in a few different things. And my reason for this dialogue is, I see a few things here. I see the tie-in for SCAG with money coming down from the Fed to develop middle mile and last mile broadband, potentially with digital inclusion. I hear the workforce discussion about we don't necessarily have the workforce elevating within our community. Either one, they're not being trained adequately to receive the high paying jobs, or they have some skills and their jobs for them exist elsewhere. And then we have a high proportionate amount of government employment, and we have a high proportionate amount of reliance on construction and construction jobs or things related to construction, whether it's supply chain, et cetera. And what I'm wondering is, as part of this discussion, with the monies coming down from the Fed, will one, some of these monies be allocated to training the workforce with digital inclusion, in addition to funding the last mile and the middle mile network? And then two, as it relates to SCAG, is there a tie-in here with the vehicle trips calculation and also the future of the need for carbon credits coming into the state of California? We need that last mile, middle mile network to support the next wave of vehicle utilization. That's a requirement today, but is it further justified by, the cities looking at the impact of carbon credit to align policies? Just my thoughts. Sorry to be so long-winded.
I think those are rhetorical questions, George. I mean, yes, there are tie-ins, but I think that we're still developing what those linkages and understanding how to make those become real. Maria, it looked like you have your hand raised.
There was a nuance. It's not necessarily the federal government that's going to have funds for digital inclusion and education, but the state funds that might come from federal, but also in the state budget, definitely under Broadband for All account for digital inclusion and education. So that's the other lens that we're looking through for funding in that regard.
To that end too, the federal money, state money even right now, digital inclusion and digital literacy is not a one-time cost, right? People continue to be born, people continue to move into the area who need to have that. So this one-time funding is not going to be a long-term solution to inclusion.
There was legislation actually passed to fund continuously, so it becomes a regular budget item. So that I think that there's hope there for that, because I think the policymakers recognize that it's not a one and done. You're right. That's why we have to keep building houses, because people keep getting born. So I think that there's, keeping an eye on that legislation and policy at the state level is going to have more of an impact on how we train our workforce and students. Just as we move forward, we've got to keep an eye on that.
And I'll mention one other potential local source of funding for broadband. We are in the process of developing, in partnership with the Ventura Council of Governments, with funding from SCAG. We're developing a VMT adaptive mitigation program, and we're looking at a whole range of project types and specific projects that can reduce VMT, and developing a sort of bank or exchange process for VMT impacts under CEQA. And I won't go into the nitty-gritty painful details of this program that we're developing, but one of the things that we are doing is developing a cost per VMT reduced. And broadband could be included as a project type, or even specific projects that would be eligible for funding from the voluntary fees that could be paid through this program. So I've already sent a note to our consultant that's developing that program to make sure that we're capturing broadband and potential reductions associated with it. So another possible source of funding down the road.
It sounds like pilots. We could do a couple of pilots of some sort that would talk about using broadband in lieu of the VMT. That'd be great.
Sign more park up. We'll do it. We'll put projects in,
I was waiting for your hand up.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Brian. I need to add you to my my project development team.
We're in.
Just a quick question for Brian. Brian, this has come up in some of the meetings in the city of Ventura, and I'm wondering if it has come up as well in Moore Park. Are the cities concerned of losing tax revenue associated with Plano telephone services that they receive, with the charges that were mentioned earlier in the discussion? Are the cities concerned about that as we look at more over the top consumption of services using broadband? And if so, what are the revenue replacements for that?
Yes. So on CASIF, I don't know, because that state surcharge on those bills goes up to the state and then funds, among other things, the broadband consortium. We're more concerned actually with cable cutting, because we have a tax on cable revenues that's in the millions of dollars for just Moore Park. And but what we've seen happen is that the in-ground providers keep raising their prices, and therefore our taxes, which are a percentage, go up as well. So those have been, although decreasing very slowly, at a much slower rate than we feared.
Thank you. That's helpful, because the idea of, and this came up with Tim Williams when Tim was bidding on some projects within the city of Ventura, that the sales tax was forecasted to come down slightly, and the utilization taxes, et cetera. And then there was the opportunity to maybe add in surcharges on top of the broadband to the end user as a way to replenish, those lost taxes. And, there was some resistance, but look, at the end of the day, all these organizations that are fostering these conversations rely on those tax revenue coming down in the ways they come down from the state to the county to the city, et cetera. And I think that needs to be factored in from a policy discussion.
I'll hop in on, there's an item that we mentioned earlier regarding, the hub and spoke and distribution, but thinking of it now under the sort of general category of how do things change as commute patterns change or as this technology changes, and as you just raised and Brian responded to. We don't have, I don't think, any city land use people on here, but I know we have the slow cog folks, I think maybe still here. It hasn't really materialized yet, but one of the interesting conversations that we picked up was mostly out of Los Angeles and Inland Empire, actually, is if you have more people commuting, or rather working from home, then one of the virtues of being able to work from home is that maybe most of the services that you were, some of the services or amenities that you were able to gather in a more urbanized area where you worked, cool restaurants, bars, other amenities, might then, as a matter of land use policy, be allowed to be more distributed through the suburban and rural, or excuse me, residential neighborhoods. I live in the Ojai Valley, Miners Oaks, county unincorporated area, residential, but within 2 blocks of my house in 2 different directions, I've got at least 4 different great restaurants that I can walk to. When I stay home, that's where I go. I don't hop in my car. Now, it's a unique circumstance that I'm lucky that I'm having them, but I have heard through land use folks on a state and national basis, it's, oh my God, if we've theorized that we want to keep that stuff out of the neighborhoods and keep it in areas zoned for commercial activity, maybe we rethink that. James, does that ring a bell at all? Is that dialogue evolving, or am I crazy?
Well, yeah, it does sound great. We've long been proponents of mixed use so that more housing and jobs and places people want to go, coffee shops or restaurants or whatnot, are within walking distance. One of our efforts right now is to look at our land use in a 15-minute community picture. And by 15 minutes, I mean walking 15 minutes, not driving 15 minutes. But our communities are much smaller than your communities. One of our 4 subregions has less population than Ventura City, which have 100,000 people. So I think all of our 4 subregions have less than that individually. But what we saw with observed data in 2019, before the pandemic started, our 101, our major highway spine, was growing congestion, getting worse and worse. Our 2-lane freeway, as was mentioned earlier, is still that same 2-lane freeway from 70 years ago. And that congestion was rising to a peak of, this is a problem, and we've been looking at addressing it for years. The COVID hit 2019, everybody stayed home, and we saw that congestion drop. Now, 2 years later, we're still in this pandemic. We're still having this opportunity to work from home more, but our volumes back on 101 during peak hour across 4 locations, AM and PM, we look at annually, almost across the board, they're back at the same levels. This is just workers, but we don't know that it's just workers. It's just during commute time. Are there more visitors that are coming during those times? We don't know. But what we did see during that real crunch time in 2019, where more people were working from home, was the congestion peaks shifted. Instead of morning and evening, there's a 2 p.m. peak of congestion in a spot that never had congestion, let alone at that time. And it's because people now are shifting their priorities to go to a different restaurant, go farther away, go to Home Depot and pick up whatever they needed. So our hope that we could bring, again, more mixed uses to the walkable neighborhoods is a great premise. But eventually people decide, I've gone to that restaurant 3 times last week, I'm going to go somewhere else.
I hear you.
At least there's that opportunity more often. So it still is a good premise.
Yeah.
We'll still continue to push it.
At least it is an impact to land use thinking, but whether it's a significant, I don't know.
Yeah. But I would like to say a great discussion. I really appreciate being 100 miles plus away, but still involved in this. I think there is a link to transportation, maybe not directly, but definitely broadband is a form of transportation, in my opinion. How do we use our systems to work together?
Andy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just want to share an article, oddly enough, I read a few days ago in the New York Times about restaurants in the suburbs. So I think that is a probability. So.
Sounds like there's a ripe opportunity for some academics somewhere to look at
Oh,
the shift
God,
in
there's a
daytime
dissertation.
populations. I'm still shedding restaurants in Moore Park. We were hopeful that having people work from home would be a help to our dry cleaners, our restaurants, but we're still getting hammered.
Wait, none of us are doing dry cleaning working at home, Brian, just for the
Well,
record.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Amanda.
I was just going to say, I shared in a link in the chat to our comprehensive transportation plan update information hub. We have it's our sort of online meeting place. And, we are in the process of updating the countywide comprehensive transportation plan. So we're looking at a whole range of strategies that could include broadband. Certainly, it also includes land use strategies and active transportation, improving transit service, and a whole range of other strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled. So anyone who's interested in, the more transportation side of this discussion, please, feel free to reach out, and we'd love to have your participation in that planning effort. So thanks. And I have to drop off for another meeting and that I'm facilitating shortly. So forgive me for.
Thanks so much,
leaving early.
Amanda.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Tim, I'm going to put you on the spot. We haven't heard much from providers in the provider perspective yet, and would be very interested in your thoughts, having sat through the last hour plus of conversation. Where do you think we ought to be working with the industry in moving this conversation forward?
Well, we're coming in as a competitive provider, meaning the incumbents essentially have a pretty good stakeholder in place. And what we're finding is when we're communicating with some of these cities is that they really are taking a view at the underserved, really that digital divide, and trying to see how we can put that into part of our plan, which we're doing. And I think that's great. I often wonder why that's not what everyone's doing, but most of the providers do have some sort of an opportunity, a lower income opportunity for services and whatnot. I think it's just, we're at this weird hurdle place where we look, why aren't we all at a gig? Because it's going to be 10 gigs soon. And it's just trying to get us all to that point. And, once we get ourselves there, great, but it just takes so long, right? To get all these communities to get on board, to try and lower the hurdles so a competitive provider can come in. I think if any of the primary incumbents just, or all of them stepped up and we're able to make this not an issue anymore, we wouldn't have to have these kinds of conversations as much, but we do because it is an issue. And so anyway, I think this is the kind of conversation that we have the people on the group here that are parts of the city, parts of economic development groups. Those all tie together and they all are relative. And so I'm glad to see their comments and their thoughts on it. It's a slow moving ship that we're kind of trying to twist a little bit. And I think we've got the right minds here talking about it.
Tim, what do you think of, one of the questions we were asking was the major barriers. If you were king and we could change the world, where would we start? What are the biggest places of slowdown that you're seeing right now?
Well, I think the county has a good start on it in the work they've been doing to identify the zones of the county that need some level of backbone or middle mile, that we call it. So we've got that map. We've seen Magellan, we've seen you show it, we've seen Terry show it, that says, hey, this doesn't exist. How can we make it exist to help first the public industry? So how can our counties and cities benefit from this? And then how can we utilize that to really support the private side? Truthfully, they both are required. They both are what we need. We do need the infrastructure as a government entity, But if the businesses and families and school children and whatnot aren't able to utilize it, then that too is just as important, if not more so. So I think that the map's such a great start. Probably where we're at right now, if I were to pick one hurdle, Bill, is that we're trying to do it all at once. Not we, but in general, it seems like, and it just seems to take forever. I think we should take that map and take it mile by mile and start making it happen. And that's either by cooperation with the private industry, working through some of these grant opportunities, because it would be great if, let's say 3 years from now, 25% of that map's fulfilled. That would be awesome. Often what we see is 3 years from now, we're still working on that big funding, or we're still working on, and it just doesn't get us there. So I would say that would be good, is trying to get a bit of a breakdown of the hurdle and just get started on it.
Thank you. Andy, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, question. So I think it was CME or something. It was in the Star last week that partnered with some ISP to do something, but somewhere down in that part of the county. And so it seems like every other week, I kind of hear about some new provider, and which is great in some sense, but also it's like going to the store and having 50 cereals. And it just got me kind of a little worried. At least for a city, it makes things a little bit more difficult if you're trying to figure something out, and who do you talk to, how do you partner, or is there concerns because there's less oversight maybe, or it's a third, in 30 years you realize the bill comes due or something like that. So I'm just wondering if there's any thoughts on that.
Linda?
Yeah, hold on one second here. We partnered with Sci-Fi, and there was no cost to the city, but they're actually starting construction now. They started actually in December, which will speed up connectivity and provide access to everybody. And it'll also spur competition, because as somebody was alluding to earlier, the carrier out here keeps raising their rates and there is no competition and the service is not that great. So it's something that our council wanted to pursue. And it should be done within the next 2 years.
Linda, if I understand the Sci-Fi model, they're going to be allowing access to multiple providers to their fiber, right?
Yes, that is correct.
So do you know how many different providers will be able to work with Sci-Fi to get access?
I think they're opening it up. They have their own people that they have done business with, but I believe they'll be opening it up.
To 3 or 4 different local, or just they have their own partners?
Well, I don't believe it's only their own, but I believe they will open it up to spur competition.
Good, that's great.
Thank you.
We're in the home stretch, friends. Any other conversations or questions for the good of the order before we say goodbye?
Bill, just following up from what Tim was saying a little bit earlier, and recanting a discussion that Brian Chong and I had a couple of weeks back. The concept of a dig once policy has sort of disappeared from at least local discussions. Whereas we were looking at having a dig once policy in general as being beneficial to these incremental laying of fiber, as Tim mentioned. And something Brian pointed out to me last week, which I thought was interesting, is when the public works projects, the water department projects come up, they notify incumbent carriers, licensed carriers that are mainly the incumbent local exchange carriers. We only have 2 of those. And I'm wondering if all of the other carriers or potential ISPs that are unlicensed, if they're also being included in that conversation. It's very hard to at least get information when these projects come to bid. There's a long process, but the notification to, competitive broadband carriers, it's definitely not taking place.
Yeah, agree.
I can reword that, like for Tim maybe. So when we do development review, Edison is aware of that, the sewer and water utilities are aware of that, the phone providers are aware of that. Tim, would it even be of value to you to say, hey, we've got this new 25 home subdivision. Do you care? Would that help you?
It would as we're starting to evolve our network and expand it in Ventura County, it wouldn't if let's say the company's out of Nevada and they're just, to plop a new pop out there for 25 homes. But so I think in the future, that is the kind of thing we are interested in. 2,500 homes would be more, would move the needle. But of course, once we're there, like in Santa Paula, that would be a no-brainer, right? So.
Yeah. So I mean, if we governments just did a thing like, here's an email list, subscribe, and you'll get a notice of, hey, there's this, we got this application for this, and 95% of them you'll probably ignore because it's not big enough or not where you are. But every now and then you'll get one, like that would be a service you'd sign up for.
If nothing, yes, Brian. And if nothing else, I'm going to keep seeing more park pop up in my inbox, right? So like, oh, there's something happening. And as I see that happening more and more, it's going to recognize that things are moving in Moore That should be something we're taking a look at. So.
Well, here in Santa Paula, we're starting the Harvard project that was originally like 3 million, then 5 million, then 7 million. Now I forget, we're 15 million or something like that because of construction costs, and it's water and sewer. But when we looked at, I was kind of pushing for the dig once, quote unquote, but now that just added on, it just became cost prohibitive. So I don't believe we're going to do that.
Yep. As we wrap up, I want to give a shout out to Michael Solstice. Michael, I did buy the book, Wireless Wars, and it's fascinating, the discussion of 5G and the impact it has on communities. He highly recommended it. I'm into it, and taking down a paragraph or two every day. And we talk about transformational and what's happening in China at the moment, and all the things tied to the 5G industry. And we're just tackling one piece of this elephant right now.
I think that 5G can be part of the solution given the high bandwidth it offers, the low latency, and the fact that it connects naturally with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of IoT devices, which is another aspect of this. Not only people need to get online, but devices as well on factory floors, such as our local has in Oxnard and other places.
Yeah, thanks. Bill, I think we hit 10 o'clock. I think a number of us have off.
Dan wanted to make a comment. He has his hand up.
I just had a quick question. Being new to the consortium, I think this is the first meeting I've made. Do we have a strategic plan or where we want to be in 3 years or 5 years? Because I mean, just so that we can keep, moving the needle towards some of the topics we talked today. I think they're all important, and I think talking about how we've been impacted by the pandemic and how that's impacted our services. But we struggle with path diversity, even with scenic, right, and our 10 gig connections at our colleges. So I'm just, and I'm interested because, in servicing our community and all our students and all of our homes and creating that equitable access, I'd like to know, how we continue to move the needle towards that.
It's a great question. Meeting's over. No, Bill, you want to take a stab at it? I wouldn't say, I'll take a short stab. I wouldn't say that we have got a real built out strategic plan. The progress that we've made in the region is getting some really quality detailed mapping and identifying gaps within the region and some priorities for closing, especially those middle mile gaps. It would not be appropriate to really call it an absolute strategic plan because it doesn't really integrate last mile and the rest of the detail. Bill, you want to give a better answer than I did?
We've got pieces and parts, but it's not been brought together, and that's something we're working on. It's a high priority in the next few months.
Great, thank you. And if you need any data from me, let me know.
Absolutely, really appreciate your help because it's going to take all of us. Fantastic.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Our time has run out. Appreciate the feedback, and we'll look forward to the continuing conversation.
We'll let you know. We'll share the materials, all of it that we have, including the study from Dr. Demouy, so you can see the excruciating detail of zip code by all the rest of the data too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.